Hello everyone, hope you've had an enjoyable Christmas. Now I'm here to take you through my favourite Criterion releases of 2024. Now I'm not doing a top 10, instead I'd like to choose my favourite releases across the entire year, starting of course with January and going through to December. Now this could include a director's film set, despite it containing more than one film. So let's see how this pans out for us. Now January saw a nice selection of releases, including the upgrade to the 4K of the Abu trilogy, the Coen brothers' Blood Simple coming to 4K, and in the UK we had La Bamba, a great release of the 1987 biopic about Richie Valens and his meteoric rise to fame, only to be sadly taken from us, along with Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper in that fatal plane crash of 1959. Lou Diamond Phillips did a brilliant job portraying the young singer in the film. We saw the UK release on 4K of Thelma and Louise, very popular here, and in the US a set of films from Chantal Akerman called Masterpieces, featuring her work from 1968 through to 1978. The Netflix film Mudbound, and at the end of the month, complete with some controversial packaging as well, we got Danny Boyle's Train Spotting. Now this is my favourite release for the month of January. It's the story of the drug addict Renton and his gang of cohorts in Edinburgh in Scotland, and the introduction of course of a new type of filmmaking as well, with really fast cutting, a surreal tale complete with an amazing soundtrack from contemporary artists. There are so many funny moments in this film, not to mention the superb performances as well from the cast, predominantly made up of fresh new talent, including Ewan McGregor, Johnny Lee Miller, Ewan Bremner, Callan MacDonald, and of course the more established performer Robert Carlyle in the role of Begbie. Now I remember the audience's reaction when I saw it in the cinema back in that year. It was electric, and I still remember it to this very day. I love this release and what is offered of course on its supplements as well. Now let's move into February. And we had the 4K release of Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller, always a favourite at the Criterion sales at Barnes & Noble. The Hong Kong double bill of Heroic Trio and Executioners, and that featured Michelle Yeoh, Anita Lau and Maggie Cheung. A great 4K release of the 1939 film The Roaring Twenties, teaming up Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Cagney, with great chemistry on screen from both of them. And we had the 1964 oppressive race relation film Nothing But a Man, as well as our first Janus Contemporary release of the year, the German film A Fire. But what took my fancy for February was the arrival of 4 films from a French director in a nice Blu-ray set, and that was Eric Rohmer's Tales of the Four Seasons. Now this is a director who's good with narrative flow, and the way the main characters intersect and transect within each other's lives is masterfully done across the 4 films. Each one is largely set within the calendar season of its title, and each one contains a story thematically appropriate to its moment in the year. Now each one is also unmistakably a Rohmer film, filled with soulful, beautiful, often frustrating characters who are prone to engage against the backdrops of some of France's most striking vistas. The 4 films were produced between 1980 and 1998 by Eric Rohmer. Nothing very dramatic usually happens in a Rohmer film, of course. Well, at least nothing loud and violent, certainly. The characters are usually too well behaved, and they're sometimes too distracted by their own problems to pay much attention at all to the plot Rohmer has thrust them into. Now that's one of the pleasures of watching Rohmer films. We can recognise the rhythms of real life in them, in which personal drama sometimes has to wait while we attend to routine duties. And there's also the sense in a Rohmer film that the characters are free to walk out if they want to. They're not on assignment. They don't need to stick with the plot to the bitter end, like they normally do in a Hollywood film. And also the appeal of a Rohmer film depends on the personal charm of the actors in it. They're usually pleasant, bright and bourgeois, and we want them to find happiness, but we're not going to lose too much sleep if they fail to do so in their quest. And the real appeal may be that they lead lives just like ours, but in other bodies and with other friends. Their decisions are like test drives for trips that we might take ourselves someday. Now, this is a really great set. I thoroughly enjoyed watching all 4 of these films, and I can say it's a worthy addition to my personal collection, and my favourite for the month of February. Now, I choose my first and only documentary title in the month of March, but first let's quickly look at the opposition for that month. We had All That Money Can Buy from 1941. That's the story of a man who sells himself to the devil and comes to collect, of course. The devil is played brilliantly by Walter Huston. The Runner is a close runner-up for my favourite film of the month. It tells the story of a young boy who's desperately struggling to survive in Iran. Lynch Oz. Interesting take, this, on David Lynch and the connection that he has to the film The Wizard of Oz. Lots of filmmakers were brought in to give their insight into the comparisons drawn here. We have a French film, of course, that came out that month starring Guzlagi Malanda, and that was Saint-Omer, a story about a girl who takes her child's life and then is brought before a court to defend herself and justify her plea. The title comes from the place in which it was set. And the brilliant To Die For, that's the Gus Van Sant dark comedy starring Nicole Kidman as a woman who craves celebrity status and will do absolutely anything to get it, including kill. But it is a documentary that I mentioned that takes my favourite film, released in the month of March, and it's All the Beauty and the Bloodshed from Laura Patra. It's a campaign of protests by a famous artist and photographer called Nan Goldin. She wanted to get the Sackler family's name removed from sponsorship of many public art galleries. Now, this is a touching and emotional documentary, and I was particularly impressed by the protest that Pain conducted at the Guggenheim Gallery in New York. And needless to say, it was successful. Now, Pain, P-A-I-N, stands for Prescription Addiction Intervention Now. This infamous family called the Sacklers had fooled the whole of America that their wonder drug OxyContin was the answer to their chronic pain. Instead, it only turned those who sought it into addicts, many of them young people losing their lives due to this corporate greed. Now, the crusade of Nan Goldin and her protesters affected change and proved that corporate pharmaceutical companies could be brought to rights. It was also nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the 95th Academy Awards and at the year's BAFTA Awards as well. Now, moving into the month of April. And we see a nice cross-section of releases this month as well. I found it difficult to make a choice this month because of the wide range of films available. None were alike. We started with a brilliant French film touching on racial disharmony and young disillusionment in the banlieue of Paris by Mathieu Kassovitz, La Haine on 4K. In the UK, we got Akira Kurosawa's Dreams getting an upgrade to 4K. In the US, we had an upgrade to 4K of Peter Weir's film Picnic at Hanging Rock. It's about a group of girls from the early 20th century who encounter something unusual in an Australian outback on an afternoon's outing, and the effect it has on them. They return unharmed. Werkmeister Harmonies, Bela Tarr's tale of a strange performer who arrives in a town accompanied by a whale and the intrinsic change the town undergoes as a result. I Am Cuba, the Russian propaganda film from Mikhail Kalatazov from the 1960s, made not long after the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, and the unique style of filmmaking that was possible when money wasn't an object to creativity and to artistic vision. A dogfight on the eve of a soldier going to war, played by River Phoenix. He bets with colleagues on who can date the ugliest girl, but the girl he picks gives him more than he bargained for, and despite his cruel action, they start a relationship with her knowing that he could go off to his death for his country. But the one that just pipped the post for me was La Haine. It stands for hate. As well as being a unique film, it also launched the career of Vincent Cassel, whose two friends go off on an adventure into the centre of Paris. Now, they come across hostile police, a drug dealer who doesn't take kindly to them at all, and of course, throughout, despite their fairly harmless bravado and antics, there is a strange inevitability fueled by events that have taken place earlier that day. It highlights the unsettled existence of young men who are left outcast by society and make their own way with little support, and they're antagonised, of course, by authority in an urban area. The 4K particularly brought out the blacks, and the image was pin sharp throughout. There, of course, is that brilliant shot in the film of the three lads on the Champs-Élysées balcony with that dolly shot. Brilliant. This year, the 4K offerings have been particularly good from Criterion, with them committing to the format. The relationship with Studio Canal in Europe, taking some of the restorations from them as well as other studios, has only strengthened their position as a boutique label, I feel. On to May now, with 2 UK releases, the 4K upgrade of Raging Bull and Dazed and Confused, and in the US we got 4 releases, 2 4Ks and 2 Blu-rays, and 3 film director's sets. Now we have 2 films here, the story of Floating Weeds, Yasuhiro Ozo's 1930 silent film, followed by his own remake of it from the 1950s in colour. That's Floating Weeds, offering a unique insight into how Ozo's own style had become more refined in the intervening decades. 3 revolutionary films by Senegalese director Ousmane Sembène, an African director with his 1970s political films, Emitai, Zala and Chedo, and in turn they explored the strains of colonialism upon cultural traditions and elements of African folklore, and the opportunism amongst male authority figures and the combustible tensions among ancient traditions and individual freedoms. We had the Oscar-winning Anatomy of a Fall, with a sterling performance in it from Sandra Hüller as a woman who's put on trial and accused of killing her husband in questionable circumstances. The film goes to dissect their relationship and her feelings for her son, who is drawn in as a witness against his own mother. But my favourite from the month is, of course, Michael Powell's Peeping Tom, a film that nearly ended his career from 1960. It got an excellent 4K upgrade in the collection, and it's a film said to be the early arrival of a genre of filmmaking that nobody had seen at that point, neither the critics or the public. A film set from the viewpoint of a serial killer, played by Carl Bohm, a young photographer who wants to capture young women's pain and suffering on film for his own personal edification. A deeply disturbed individual, it was presented in a detached and unemotional way that alienated the viewer and the audiences alike. But still, it was a bold and brave undertaking by Michael Powell that has stood the test of time, and now, in 2024 especially, has seen a new restoration and fresh re-examination of the subjectivity and his choices as a director at the time, as well as being my favourite in May. It remains one of my favourites of the year, actually. Many modern films have modelled themselves on Peeping Tom. The features on the Blu-ray disc offers great insight as well, including that of Thelma Schoonmaker, who was married to Michael Powell, of course. Now in the UK we got Richard Linklater's Slacker. That's a film made earlier in his career. In June, we start with an upgrade of the Terry Gilliam film, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I look through his distorted lens at a story by Hunter S. Thompson with Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro. They land in Las Vegas, drugged out of their heads, to experience the hedonistic nature of this aberration of a town amidst the Nevada desert. And in the US, we also got a Janus Contemporary title, and that was All That Breathes. I'll talk more later about some more Janus Contemporary titles. And then we have Querelle, about a sailor who discovers himself sexually. It's directed by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and the cover art was based on Tom of Finland artwork. It stars Jean Moreau and Franco Nero. Victims of Sin, a great example of Cuban-Mexican rumbera and hot Latin American rhythm. It starred Ninon Sevilla, a famous actress and dancer, in the lead role. Great music throughout this film and a feeling of the period in which it was set. Very, very enjoyable. We got a 10-part Amazon series as well, directed by Barry Jenkins, which was a surprise announcement, I thought, to the collection. It was called The Underground Railroad. The last time a TV offering was added to the collection was when Steve McQueen's Small Axe films came out in 2023. The Underground Railroad stars Duzo Menbedu and Joel Edgerton and has very high production values. It's got 10 episodes in total. It's set in the states of Georgia, Carolina, Tennessee and Indiana, and is sobering, unsettling and hypnotic. Some of it a really hard watch. Quoting the director himself, marvelling at the savagery that man is capable of when he believes his cause to be just. Girl Fight. Bullied by her father at home and feeling adrift at school, Diana Guzman, that's Michelle Rodriguez, finds refuge in an unexpected pocket of her native Brooklyn, a time-worn boxing gym where she learns to channel her strength and discovers a sense of community, and falls for a rival fighter. In Karen Kusama's raw, understated feature debut, Rodriguez commands the screen with both tightly coiled intensity and deep wells of vulnerability. Now, we had the welcome upgrade also that month of one of David Lynch's most iconic films, Blue Velvet, from 1984, starring Isabella Rossellini, Kyle MacLachlan and Dennis Hopper, who gives us a powerful and unsettling performance as the crazed Frank. Now, we had another Janus contemporary called Orlando, My Political Biography, by Paul B. Preciado, in which a number of transsexuals all play Orlando from Virginia Woolf's book. And in doing so, they make a statement about themselves, their sexuality, and what Orlando and Virginia Woolf represents in today's queer world, relating to gender identity and touching on dysphoria. But my choice for June is the 1996 Wachowski Bound. Now, this is a classy thriller starring Meg Tilly and Gina Gershon as two women who meet and fall in love with each other. And then they decide to steal the money from one of their psychotic boyfriends called Caesar, played in the film by Joe Pantoliano. Now, there's some great steamy moments here, accompanied by some excellent gambits, played out well by the two girls, and the boyfriend, the power of a call back on Riedel on a phone, well, that gives the ultimate reveal for him, certainly. And the almost incidental torturing of a man in the bathroom and the drying out of the blood-soaked dollar bills all give a quite unique take on a straightforward premise and makes it equal more than the sum of its parts. It's a story set with two lesbians and great performances as well from our two female protagonists. It opened the door to the brothers' talent and paved the way to their Matrix films, which came a few years later, establishing them as exciting new Hollywood directors with a singular shared vision. Well, already we're halfway through the year and we come to July. And of course, we had another Barnes & Noble sale in the US. This month, the popular choices for many coming to the sale were three specific releases that month. Risky Business, a comedy with a heart, and a young Tom Cruise, whose path is crossed by Rebecca De Mornay, who's a teenage heartthrob, and again, Joe Pantoliano, in a simple story of a young college guy who gets conned into losing his parents' belongings and who learns a life lesson in the process and matures practically overnight. Now, we also had the Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid in three separate cuts with a revisionist Western take. A great casting here of Chris Christopherson and James Coburn as the two eponymous characters, one of whom eventually meets his demise at the hands of the other. And there was a soundtrack to it by Bob Dylan. A shame he wasn't as good an actor as he was a singer, though. We had a relaunch in 4K of Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai, a Wim Wenders documentary about German artist and sculptor called Anselm, with some very striking images as well. A Chinese 4K of epic proportions, that's Farewell My Concubine, Black God, White Devil, and whilst in the UK we got a 4K upgrade of Brian De Palma's Blowout with John Travolta in the lead role, and Risky Business also came to the UK on 4K and Blu-ray. Now there's only one release that got my top vote in the month of June, and that was also directed by Wim Wenders. Beautifully gentle film. It was Perfect Days. Now Perfect Days is the simple tale of a man who cleans toilets in Tokyo, but whose balanced life allows him to observe the comings and goings of the citizens of the city without judgment or assumption. The arrival of his niece upsets his delicate balance. He accepts her into his home reluctantly, but in doing so he reconnects with her and comes to understand her better. It was an imposing piece, full of quiet introspection, and a film that put me in a contemplative mood after viewing it. That's quite an achievement. Moving into August, and we start with two films from Russia. Brief Encounters and The Long Farewell, from a Russian director, Kira Muratova. In Brief Encounters, we see a county girl, Nadia, come to the city to look for her love, geologist Maxim. Now, she realises that Maxim has married another woman, Valentina, and in The Long Farewell, we have a possessive mother who has a complex relationship with her son. Her son's adamant to leave home and seek his independence. We also saw the upgrade that month to 4K of the brilliant Bernardo Bertolucci film, The Last Emperor, with exclusive permission for the director to film in the Forbidden City. A long film indeed. It shows his reign from a young child through to his incarceration as ex-emperor and the communist regime in China. Not a pretty picture. This is a personal film from director Martha Coolidge. She stages a traumatic experience she had as a younger woman when she was raped by a classmate. Now this is fascinating as the camera puts you in the position of being an observer. She actually used one of her old college friends to play herself in the film. It's an interesting study with some very unsettling moments. And then we have broader comedy come our way in the guise of two films from comic actor Albert Brooks. We have Real Life, possibly the earliest fly on the wall type film. It even came out earlier than Rob Reiner's This Is Spinal Tap in 1979. It's a completely fabricated film, and it sees a comedian, director, filmmaker actually called Albert Brooks descend with his film crew on a family to follow their life. But pretty soon we realise that the director himself has issues. And when the real-life docudrama fails miserably, and the sponsors pull out, he loses his grip on sanity. Now there are some hilarious moments here. The headgear worn by the cameraman is absolutely hilarious, used throughout the film. It's so funny. But strangely, it foreshadows our modern reality television, which really isn't too far away from this film, to be honest. And the film also featured Charles Grodin as the family father. But my favourite of this month is also a film directed by Albert Brooks. It was the other release that came out the same week, and it was 4K, and it's Mother, starring Debbie Reynolds. Now, as the character's domineering mother, who has him stay with her after his recent divorce, she's an insufferable woman, and of course he has an equally insufferable brother, and clearly struggles with his independence when he's with his mother. Now, Debbie Reynolds puts in a near-perfect comic performance. Her charisma on screen shines, complete with Brooks's sardonic wit as her son. It's a great combination, these two, and a film that somehow got lost in the annals of time. It should really have had more attention. It's a fairly simple plot, but it oozes with charm and a warm heart and plenty to laugh at, and strong scripting from Albert Brooks himself, who of course wrote and directed it. Now I'll sell my old DVD, because this version is certainly superior. We also got the UK 4K release of Power of the Dog, a film by Jane Campion, with formidable performances in that from Benedict Cumberbatch and Cody Smith-McPhee, and a great score as well from Jonny Greenwood. And in the UK, we saw Blu-ray releases of Crumb and Night on Earth, that's the Jim Jarmusch film, join the UK collection. Now these of course had previously been released in the US. Now just to pause here to say that I'm not sure that all of the 4K releases needed a 4K Dolby Vision treatment, to be fair. It increased the price point for many consumers and they obviously just waited to the sales to buy them. There are some releases which are totally benefiting from this upgrade, but there's others I think where it's more negligible, especially with some of the other upgrade titles. Now we move into September and we see another Blu-ray to 4K upgrade coming our way with Alex Cox's Repo Man. Now I bought this release, young Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean Stanton appearing in the first of 2 films for him getting upgrades this year. And it's a surreal take on the world of the Repo Man. They go and basically repossess cars from the mind of a British director, a rather twisted mind I would add. We got the UK 4K release of Double Indemnity that month as well, classed of course as the ultimate noir film, and also the 1945 film with Joan Crawford, Mildred Pierce. That of course won her Oscar for the title performance that she gave. Also a 4K upgrade in the UK collection. We have a Janus contemporary from Mexican director Lila Avilés called Totem. Great central performance here given by a child actor Naima Sentes as Saul, a girl who's spending the day at her grandfather's for a surprise party for a relative, but her life is set to change. And The Long Good Friday, which is a very close runner-up to what would be my favourite for this month. It came with a brilliant 4K upgrade, a performance by Bob Hoskins as a Cockney gangster in London who wants to get into property development. It's hailed as the best UK gangster film ever made. It had great support in it from Helen Mirren and Derek Thompson. It's directed by John Mackenzie, and it even reflects the political mood of the time with inclusion of a paramilitary organisation within the plotline, which was written by Barry Keefe. But my favourite for this month is the Andrew Haigh film, All of Us Strangers. Wow. A heart-rending depiction of grief and loneliness and a unique interpretation of the story written by Tachi Yamada. The film stars Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal as 2 strangers who meet in a lift and start a relationship. Now there is an amazing section in the film where Adam, played by Andrew Scott, re-engages with his parents, played in the film by Claire Foy and Jamie Bell, with some beautifully touching moments of regret and longing as he returns to his old house and tells his parents what has happened to him, trying not to give too much away here. Andrew Haigh seems to understand deep emotional resonance, and he's able to depict this with no pretension in his films. His other 2 films in the collection, incidentally, are Weekend and 45 Years. They're also excellent pieces of work. Thoroughly recommend those too. Such intimacy is also displayed in the relationship between Scott and Mescal. It made a great impression on me, and it's a film I will certainly revisit and reflect on for some years to come. I would certainly thoroughly recommend All of Us Strangers if you haven't seen it yet. Let's start though with Happiness. It mainly concerns 3 sisters and their quest for happiness. One sister lives along the hallway from Philip Seymour Hoffman as a man who lusts after her. The other sister gets rejected by her boyfriend. She's a teacher and she struggles to attain true happiness in her life, gravitating towards one of her mature students who ends up taking advantage of her good nature. And the third sister is a housewife, but of course she is married to a man who wants to have sex with young boys. Now this is a part of the film that repulses many people and has caused a distinct split into I like it or I absolutely hate it. But I do applaud Criterion for not only releasing Happiness, but also releasing it in 4K, something we just weren't expecting to see. 3 film set, Gregor Aki's Teen Apocalypse trilogy. seeing the earlier material from this LGBTQ plus filmmaker. It's a very well presented digipack, complete with 2 of the films on 4K. That's The Doom Generation and Nowhere. And the first in the trilogy being Totally Fucked Up. It's a mix of nihilism and irony that puts a new spin on the Godard classic Masculin Féminin. Now, these films show teen angst and sexual discovery. Each film features the same actor in it. That actor is James Duval. But they're not related to each other at all. But they do clearly show Greg's development as a filmmaker. From the guerrilla style of camcorder and 16mm footage that he used in Totally Fucked Up, to the more advanced use of 35mm stock on his films that came later, like The Doom Generation and Nowhere. Now, The Doom Generation follows 3 teens as they pick up a drifter named Xavier Red, and Nowhere, of course, is the 3rd film in the trilogy. Each film looks at a disparate set of young teens on their journey to adulthood. Totally Fucked Up has a more reality TV feel, whilst The Doom Generation sees Greg Araki experiment more with surreal imagery. And finally, a more mature film, Nowhere, but it still looks closely at violence, substance abuse and eating disorders, the subjects associated with a more mature filmmaker. Now, Greg Araki wrote the part of Jordan in The Doom Generation after seeing him in the first film of the trilogy. The first film is Blu-ray only, and the other 2 films in the trilogy are both 4Ks. It's nice to see Greg Araki's work finally reach the Criterion collection, and I am still hopeful that his 2004 film, one of my personal favourites, Mysterious Skin, will also join the collection at a later date. Well, the door's open for Araki now. Moving into the month of October, Harmony Korine's film about a town that follows a twister, and after the general day-to-day banality he observes amongst its population. Now, he was very much a turn a camera on and capture an actor's natural performance sort of director. Also in October, George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead got a 4K upgrade here in the UK. We saw 2 films produced by legendary RKO producer of horror, Val Lewton, and that's I Walked with a Zombie and The Seventh Victim, as well as the Masahiro Shinoda Demon Pond, coming to 4K UHD, very impressive as well, and Louise Brooks's silent classic Pandora's Box, on Blu-ray only. Now, Louise was a flapper actress who was famous for her distinctive hairstyle, sort of bob hairstyle. This is a great addition to the collection. But my favourite film in October wasn't a Criterion release, but a Janus contemporary title, an epic from Turkish director Nuri Bilge Ceylan about dry grasses, when a cynical middle school instructor, Zamet, comes under scrutiny for misconduct. He fears that his punishment will trap him in the snowy, isolated Anatolian village he has grown to despise. The only ray of hope is his relationship with Nure, played in the film by Merve Dizdar, who won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival. A fellow teacher, she openly challenges Zamet's bitter narcissism, yet Zamet's friendship with his colleague and roommate Kanan, also who has feelings for Nure, hangs in the balance. Moving on to November, and we see one of the best months of the year. Certainly a lot of discussion when the announcements were made for these films. They caused a lot of excitement in the Criterion community generally because of the range within these titles themselves and the arrival of 3 premieres and 2 upgrades to 4K of existing titles. So we started off with Toho's restoration in 4K of Godzilla from 1954, the film that began the now successful franchise, and we had the original Scarface from 1932, starring Paul Mooney as the infamous gangster. Now, that was a nice 4K restoration, well, as far as possible, using the surviving film elements that were available. It's certainly the closest we'll get using today's restoration technology. We had the classic Akira Kurosawa film, Seven Samurai, getting its brilliant new upgrade to 4K. We also had a Janus Contemporary release that month following the recent demise of Ryuichi Sakamoto. It was decided that we would see his last recorded performance with simple piano arrangements of a selection of his work, and that was presented in a studio in Japan, filmed by his own son, called Opus. We had Guillermo del Toro's fantasy, The Shape of Water, in a new 4K restoration approved by the director himself with a nice set of supplemental features. The film had had an older release a few years previous on 4K. But for me in November, it was a toss-up between two films, Funny Girl and Paper Moon. Now, Paper Moon had the youngest ever Oscar-winning performance in it for young Tatum O'Neal. She played an orphan who goes on the road and on the con with her Ryan O'Neal, her actual father, in Kansas, not her father in the film. Directed by Peter Bogdanovich, it's great charm and two excellent central performances in it from the father and the daughter. And Funny Girl. This is the one that pipped Paper Moon to the post. It's the 1968 William Wyler film. It sees Barbra Streisand knock it out of the park with her quirky performance in the story of Fanny Bryce, a star of the Ziegfeld Follies and her meteoric rise to fame, and her on-off relationship with one Nicky Arnstein, who's a gambler. He's infatuated with her, and he dips in and out of her life, while all the time Fanny is the toast of Broadway itself and the neighbouring states, where she goes on tour with her show, including the state of Baltimore, where she arrives and sings the iconic song, Don't You Rain on My Parade. And she travels back to New York. Now, her performance in the film won her a Best Actress Oscar in 1969 and launched her film career, of course, which has been highly successful for her. So now we move into the final month of the year, December. Traditionally, it's a quieter month for Criterion, but even then, we are still seeing the UK release of Lost Highway on 4K and The Fisher King on 4K, as well as two Janus Contemporary releases, two upgrades in the US to 4K, and a final Blu-ray release to round out the year. So what did we have? Paris, Texas started the month with a superb new 4K restoration supervised by Wim Wenders, and it doesn't disappoint. It still remains a great movie about loneliness and connections to family from 1984. We have the Coen brothers film, No Country for Old Men, long awaited and very excited when it was announced to the collection. We had Bertrand Bonello's The Beast, a Janus Contemporary release. Now this sees characters traversing across past lives inside three separate time periods, 1910, 2014 and the present period, which the film is set, 2044. It stars Léa Seydoux and George McKay, carrying the entire film between the two of them. I really like this release. And we had the ultimate film about filmmaking itself, Federico Fellini's 8½. A character in it, a director who has no idea what his next film is going to be about, but everyone in the crew and the cast is clamouring for the script so they can get started. Only he has no idea what he's going to do. Evil Does Not Exist, another Janus Contemporary release, and a film from Ryosuke Hamaguchi. Now, I've just featured that recently on Let's Talk Criterion. It's about corporate greed and the safety and tranquility of an environmental oasis that is under threat of destruction. And finally, Eastern Condors, a martial arts action film directed by Sammo Hung from 1987. It contains many Hong Kong martial arts performers in it. It's all action and great set pieces as well in this little gem from the 1980s. But you won't be surprised to find that my favourite for this particular month that we're in now, December, is No Country for Old Men. It's a brilliant Coen brothers film about the discovery of $2 million and one man being pursued for that money by a vicious hitman and police sheriff. The hitman's played by Javier Bardem and Tommy Lee Jones plays the sheriff. We also have Josh Brolin as the man who finds the money. but it's stolen drug money and the cartel want it back, and the film has tension and sudden moments of violence mixed in with some humour as well. A superb screenplay by the two brothers. It's a very recent addition to the collection and of course was very popular during the recent Barnes & Noble 50% off sale in November. A list of my favourites for 2024, and the spine numbers will be listed on the screen at the end of the video. It's quite a mixed bag really of newer movies. They are my favourites this year, and I dare say you'll have your choice of favourites from the year. Please comment on what you liked and what you disliked this year from Criterion. And of course we'll be back in 2025 with the first of a busy January roster of releases for Criterion. Please don't hesitate to check out my extensive playlist of videos on the channel, including a video covering every film I've mentioned in this video, as we have some special editions as well. And if you subscribe to the channel, thank you so much for doing so. And if you haven't subscribed so far, please do, as we're the only channel that covers Criterion releases every single week. And you can also see regular posts from me on Instagram at lets_talk_Criterion. So it only remains for me to say goodbye and toast in 2025. Happy New Year and happy Criterion viewing.